So good afternoon. Welcome to the lecture within the series of seminars within the frame of the Doctoral Studies in Nuclear Engineering. Today I have the pleasure and honor to introduce the lecture by Professor Cizelj, some remarks on the operation of nuclear facilities under war conditions, which is, I think, a topic which was very important 30 years ago and is beginning important again. So, Leon, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ivo. So we'll have a little bit of time travel today from Krško back in 1991 to Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine in this year. Actually, the situation was, at least for me, very interesting in the following way. After the things in Zaporizhzhia started, in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant started, which was actually end of February or already the first day of March this year. After that, there was quite a pressure from the journalists asking what damage can occur and what could be the consequences of this permanent military attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And then as it intensified, attacks intensified in August 2022, another round of discussions with the media in Europe and beyond Europe started. I just show you a picture of the switchyard near Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant with the smoke after one of the shellings in the August, and you also can see behind the satellite or a picture of the site. Nuclear power site, a little bit on the left and on the right, the city of Reactor. We'll coming back to this situation there a little bit later. Now, in the introductory part of the lecture, let me just touch a few concepts we usually use in the nuclear safety, security, and safeguards. Now, in short term, the nuclear safety is to protect the people against radiation from radioactive materials, and this is typically taken care by the operators and controlled by the regulators, which is a national responsibility. So we have Slovenian and Ukrainian flag here. And another problem, and I believe this is the major problem now in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, is the nuclear security. So it's to protect the radiation, but the radioactive materials from the people with not very good intentions probably. But this is again, in principle, the matter of the security forces of the national governments. So again, Slovenia and Ukraine should be in the first line responsible for the security. And then the international problem is nuclear safeguards. So to protect the civilian radioactive materials not to be actually actively used in military explosion devices. For this, we have international control. So IAEA and European community, the Euratom, are responsible for this. IAEA worldwide and European Euratom agency for European Union, for the members of the European Union. Just to underline here, probably this is more the question of nuclear security than the nuclear safety, but of course problems in nuclear security can result in problems in nuclear safety, and sometimes also vice versa. The main message of the ENS, which was actually European Nuclear Society, where we did most of these talks to the media since basically March to August and September, were the following. The first one, it's the workers' well-being at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and their well-being and personal safety, which are at the core of trouble at the moment, actually for all the time. It's not getting better, by the way, as I will say a little bit later. It's the Ukrainian staff working under the supervision of Russian military, and now, if I understand also, if I understand correctly, the Russian company is being established to take over the nuclear power plant formally. The second point is that the VVR reactors there are far or different, much more different than Chernobyl reactors. So there is no, for practical reasons, no way that we'll have runaway reactors there and problems with the runaway reactors like there were in Chernobyl. And the third one, even in the worst case that there would be some radiation accident, this will be more or less localized event with probably their 20 to 30 kilometer radius with some importance for the health and safety. I will say a little bit more about why we decided to put this 20-30 kilometer radius there. And then on the little bit more on the personal note, in my Twitter, I said in August 19 that occasional shelling is more or less fear-mongering. So the reasons for fear-mongering, if the risks of radiation accidents are low to moderate, and even the consequences will be low and moderate, then pushing the narrative that it's kind of the planetary catastrophe or something like that, the imminent planetary catastrophe would only or could only be fear-mongering. Of course, now the fear-mongering is only possible if there are some fears. If people have no fears, then the fear-mongering, of course, doesn't work. Let me now try to put some distinguishing concepts here. So let's try to make a relation about hazards, risks, and fears. Imagine you would like to go to Caribbean for some vacation. That's what you would like to do, or you would like to produce electricity, or you would like to do something else. But here you would like to swim in the Caribbean. There are two main related hazards. People will encounter them. One is sharks, which occasionally eat or kill some people, and there are also coconuts, and also coconuts occasionally kill some people. Now, technically, the risk, and risk being the product of probability and consequence of these two hazards, is pretty much equal. There are about 5 people per year on the planet who are killed by the sharks, and about 5 people per year who are killed by the coconuts. So the risk is pretty much equal. Now, if you ask about the fears, most of us would be probably much more afraid of sharks than of coconuts. So fears are not really a rational category here, and it's really difficult sometimes to get around the fears with the rational explanations. Nevertheless, if fears are the basic driving force, then fear-mongering makes even more of the fears. And that's probably good, probably the reason why we should say something about what is actually going on and where are the limits of the situation which is there. Now, let me go in my overview then also to some past experience. So the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is not the first commercial nuclear facility under the war conditions. The first one was Krško nuclear power plant in Slovenia in 1991. So we'll look a little bit about the situation which was there and the decisions which were made there and analysis which were made at that time. Then the second point, at least in the experience of my personal experience and my team here in Slovenia was connected with the 9/11 event in New York City, in the United States, where we had really major suicidal attacks on non-military targets. Now, at that time, nuclear power plants were perceived as potential future targets. So we started to discuss or think about deliberate damage. And then the next one is the situation with the COVID-19 pandemics. Again, my team was involved in following and predicting and publicly commenting the developing situation. Now, in let's say a little bit more academic terms, we were actually sitting in the experiment. The experiment was not in the controlled conditions, so we could not exactly trust the data coming in. We relied probably during the COVID situation much more on the knowledge, understanding the process, on saying, okay, we have the right equations behind that, than on the data outside. It's pretty much similar situation now with Zaporizhzhia. You cannot really rely on the information from either side, Ukrainian and Russian. What you can do today is to have some social network connections directly to the site and then try to combine what's going on. And always, always, always think back if this is physically possible. What you see is what you see really possible, plausible. And for this, of course, some preliminary thinking about possible consequences and possible scenarios, like the thinking in Krško nuclear power plant in 1991 becomes very important. You need a kind of internalized model of what's going on, and then you try to compare this all the time with the data available. Now, Krško is a two-loop Westinghouse pressurized water reactor. At the moment, it's just shy of 700 megawatt electric. During the war conditions in 91, it was about 660 megawatt electric. So commercial operation started since January 1st of 83. In the 91 Slovenian war, it was a 7-day war. Luckily, we were very short in this. There was imminent threat of air attacks directly to the nuclear power plant. So a team of my older colleagues assembled in the shelter here at the reactor center. I was around as a young PhD student then, so I still remember these discussions and how the decisions were then made or assessments were made. But what came out as the major risk during this assessment, not really analysis, was something which is very similar to the Fukushima scenario. So loss of offsite power, not really so much on the side of the nuclear power plant. But you know, there are tens of kilometers of power lines, and it's easy just to kill or to destroy one or two pillars to get rid of one line. And this is happening now in Zaporizhzhia. Well, weekly, all the connections get lost and get restored and get lost and get restored. So this was considered at that time also the major risk for the Krško nuclear power plant, and this combined with the loss of ultimate heat sink, so losing the river water at the same time would lead to something similar to Fukushima. Now, direct damage to the reactor was considered at that time not plausible, and I would still say that direct damage to the reactor, especially by random shelling, is actually out of question. Damage to the spent fuel in Krško, at that time, all the spent fuel was in the pool outside of the containment. Let me just say that Zaporizhzhia, the containment, the spent fuel pool is inside of the containment. And there is also dry storage. Was considered low to moderate, and even if there would be some consequences, that would be localized meaning basically the plant campus, nothing more serious, nothing very serious beyond that. During the threat of air attacks, the Slovenian regulator, and that's another, let's say, difference between Zaporizhzhia and Krško. So Slovenia regulator was in power all the time. Zaporizhzhia, of course, what Ukrainian regulator thinks about the plant became irrelevant, more or less in March 4. So the influence of the regulator was minimized. But here in Slovenia, the regulator did request cold shutdown of the plant. There are two good consequences of this. The first one is you minimize the need of cooling. Let me just remind you that 1 liter per second of water, if you vaporize it, would give you about 2.2 megawatts cooling power. And within about a few days, the residual heat is close to a few megawatts. So you are in the range of a few liters of water per second, which you need. Of course, the second good consequence of cold shutdown is to minimize inventory of radionuclides. Now, after, let's say, more than 1 month of the shutdown of Zaporizhzhia, iodine is probably 4 or less times. There is about 4 times less iodine than at the beginning. So even if something counts, the source term is less and less. But what is not really good is that by getting the plant into the cold shutdown, we deliberately lose one of the levels of defensive depth in the energy, the power sources. So the plant in the house load could provide a lot of electricity to maintain the safety systems running. But if you shut down the plant, then you must rely on the only one source less, which is then the grid and the diesel generators and perhaps something else. Well, luckily, Krško nuclear power plant finally was not attacked, was not conquered, and there were no consequences beyond the really thinking what the consequences could be. Nevertheless, after the imminent threat of air attacks, there was a decision of the regulator that the operation was authorized only at 75% of the full power plant. The reason for that is very simple, actually. Krško nuclear power plant could never stabilize on the house load from full power, but from 75% power it was possible. The major risks, again, it was considered after the idea of air attack was actually the history. Its loss of offsite power. Let me remind you that it's really easy to destroy the power grids far from the nuclear power plant. There were some explosives planted in Slovenian power grid at that time, but again, luckily never detonated. So a small reminder about the nuclear safety after 9/11 event. I mentioned before that 1 liter per second of water gives you about 2.2 megawatts of cooling power. So using the water pumps from fire brigade is really very good idea if you can bring them on the site within an hour or so. So the use of mobile equipment like water pumps and generators of power, electricity power, was mandated in USA after 9/11. In the European Union, they were kind of voluntary before 2011, so mandatory after Fukushima, post-Fukushima stress tests. And Ukraine actually participated in the European stress tests, so one could assume that they do have mobile equipment around. So in some countries, just for information, the mobile equipment is stored and maintained very close or at the nuclear power plants. And some larger countries, at least larger in terms of nuclear power plant, do have regional or national repositories. The only requirement here is that equipment should be available within an hour or so before the core melt actually kicks on. Another interesting discussion in my team after 9/11 was actually trying to figure out what would be explosive charges of, let's say, large explosive charges, 1 ton of TNT and up to, I think we went up to 20 tons of TNT. And now 1 ton of TNT is probably a good measure of what a shell can bring to a site in one piece. That's a really large shell already, a large piece of weapons. So you can see the lines show the kind of safe distances around the plant for different structures, with about 1 ton of TNT being detonated somewhere close to the plant. Now, what you can also deduce very fast from this picture is that especially the reinforced concrete is really resistant, or takes a lot of energy to bring it down. Now, the good news is, especially also for Zaporizhzhia, that VVR 1000s are actually in safety features and in the basic layout very comparable to the generation 2, or a little bit, perhaps even a little bit better than generation 2 pressurized water reactor. What is probably very nice to see in this picture is that between the reactor and the outside wall, there are many very thick reinforced concrete walls. So that makes you a feeling how difficult it would really be to penetrate through all these walls to damage the reactor, or some structures very close to the reactor. And also, imagine here is the small pool for the spent fuel, which is inside of the reactor. So the most serious radioactive materials are very well stored behind multiple reinforced concrete barriers. The layout of the site, the 6 reactors are located here in a row. The distance between the reactors is about 150 meters. And the city of Enerhodar is very close. It's within 5, let's say less than 5 kilometers to the reactor. And this is probably the most difficult part of the, where this is probably the location where the damage, radiation damage could have some serious effect. Anyhow, there are 6 VVR 1000/230 there, each with 950 megawatt electrics. A look into the reinforcements in the containment of VVR 1000, just to give you an idea how robust these structures are, not because of the military or potential military attack, but because of the normal design of the nuclear power plants against the internal and external events which are there. Because we are trying to defend the safety systems against earthquake, against airplane crashes and stuff like that. Now, brief situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Plant was conquered by Russian army on March 4, 2022, after maybe a day or so of battles. It was and still is operated by the licensed Ukrainian operational staff, which is in principle okay. The control oversight of the operation was taken by Russian army, advised by Rosatom employees, which in principle is not okay, because then you have this pressures on the plant staff, which never result in good performance. They result in frustrations. It results in with time with some fatigue, and some could be also serious mistakes. Even with very experienced professionals, under too much fatigue or under too much frustrations, you end up with pretty basic mistakes. The second thing which is not okay in such situation is that the oversight by the Ukrainian national nuclear regulator was actually disrupted. So the regulator, can you imagine what would be the choice of the operators if they have conflicting instructions from the regulator and from the military on site? Who would they obey? and why. If somebody is pointing the gun on your head, I guess it's easy to decide. And up to date, there is no impact on environment and health reported, so it's a pretty good chance that no radiation came out of the plant until today. IAEA mission arrived on the site on September 3, is still there, while the IAEA has power of observers. They can observe, they can report possibly some situations, but they cannot be actively involved in the operation or oversight by the army of the operation. So they are more as a moral support there, and for us maybe to have the third source of information, possibly a little bit less biased. Now the reactors, the plant was in operation with different configurations until September 11, and on September 11 a cold shutdown was reached after plant was operating for about a week on the house load, and after that, during this house load operation, one of the disruptions of the grid actually put them into somehow in the cold shutdown. Now, what were the main risks before the cold shutdown during the operation, and probably and possibly also today the same main risks remain? The most important is de facto control of the staff and plant by the military. So the general director was detained and released, the human resources director was detained, released. The new company in Russia now is pressing staff to sign the new contracts. So as I mentioned before, frustrations and fatigue on the staff, that's really the main risk there. And that risk was actually not present, or at least not for a very long time for Krško operators in 1991. The second one is the occasional damage of main power lines. So there is rather large redundancy of power sources also at Zaporizhzhia. So they were able to maintain the household operation for a while. There is a nearby thermal power plant, diesel generators are there, and most probably also mobile equipment, but there are also risks with this. So is there enough fuel? Can this fuel be resupplied? And how easy it is to operate these things under the military pressure. Occasional military activities are, at least in my view, not a very large source of risk or large danger to the nuclear safety. They're of course annoying for everybody present there, but they are not a direct impact. They do not have a really direct impact on the nuclear safety. They could have cumulative impacts, of course, in long time. And spent fuel, as it is in small pools inside containment, the rest is in the dry storage on site. So dry storage basically would be passive cooled, the fuel which can be passively cooled after about 5 years or so. So after 5 years, the source term and passive cooling per se says also if you destroy the containers, the fuel will not actually go into meltdown. So it will be not very easy to get these materials very far away from where they are now. Very far, even 10 or 100 meters would be difficult. A look at the connection of electricity to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So in light blue, you have 750 kilovolt situation. So 4 lines, 3 south, 1 north, go out of the plant from the switchyard. Then you also can see in violet a direct connection to the nearby thermal power plant and going to nice location to the reactor, close to the reactor number 5. Now, as far as I understand the situation, now all the 3 lines to the south are down, they're destroyed somewhere away from the plant, and all of them go somehow in the Russian controlled territory. and the northern line goes to the Ukrainian controlled territory, and Ukraine is at the moment taking care of the only outside line of the plant, which is claimed to be Russian. So that's a kind of, it's good to know that both sides are somehow trying to maintain the situation there more or less reasonably. Now, what would be and why the potential consequences if we go into the reactor meltdowns, which is not very probable because both sides are interested in the electricity and the plant in the medium or long term. So let's say the plant is pretty comparable to Fukushima Daiichi, and Fukushima Daiichi resulted in about 0 casualties because of radiation. Evacuation was 20-40 kilometers, and is now it was lifted on most of the territory. So 12 years later or 11 years later, the environmental consequences are considered to be manageable or pretty much back to normal. So the plant safety features are comparable. Then the intensity of military attack, which would be comparable in the energy levels and destroying power with 15 meters tsunami or a runaway reactor in Chernobyl, to make this comparison somehow, is really not plausible. That must be a very deliberate attack, a very targeted attack. And for somebody who is sitting in the plant and has all the power in managing the plant, it's completely irrational. You can do the same or more damage with 2 or 3 switches. You don't really have to bring all the weapons there. So it's probably not, it's not plausible that such attack will happen. Well, not on the good news is that management of accident, even if you go into management under the military control of the plant, would be, let's say, at least so complicated that it was in Fukushima because of the tsunami. So you have destroyed infrastructures inside the plant, and it's not really easy to move around and to bring things together. But let's say it's comparable or perhaps even worse. And then the good news is again that both sides are, at least in medium term, in need of electricity, and so far there are no clear intentions of deliberate damage. For those who are say, okay, but could be worse than Fukushima Daiichi, probably not. But then, if yes, with the runaway reactor in Chernobyl and really serious damage to the reactors because of that, the final result was in the order of 50 casualties, and the population was limited to about 50 kilometers. So, if we look around the plant, what 20, 50, and 100 kilometers would mean, then especially the smaller circle, the 20 kilometers dotted line, you'll see that basically it's more or less the city of Enerhodar, which could get really affected by this. That's the bad news for the people living there, which is mostly the operators' families were evacuated, at least in part. But they are also, in a way, professionals, and they know how to survive in such conditions and also under such pressure. I nevertheless hope it will not happen to them. Now, as we are talking about the sources of information, very useful during all these times were Telegram accounts of Energoatom, of the Ukrainian nuclear regulatory body, and of the Zaporizhzhia county administration. And one of the things on the right-hand side is the measurements of radioactivity in the cities around Zaporizhzhia or in Zaporizhzhia region from 8 o'clock this morning. You would see Enerhodar there. It's really, I'm sorry about that, but that's the Enerhodar with 9.6 microrengens per hour, which is very well within the background. So at least until this morning, today in the morning, the radiation settings in Enerhodar or radiation readings are pretty much normal. So in summary, now with, let's say, let me put it this way. In my lifetime, there were 2 reactors in the war conditions, or 2 nuclear power plants already in the war conditions, so that, which means the probability that it will happen again is considerable. We do already accumulate experience with such situations, and one of the observations to be used probably is the resiliency which was developed in the nuclear power plants to sustain the natural, external and internal hazards is also very useful in the war conditions. So if we have there very thick concrete walls which are there for mostly as biological shield against radiation, they also are very useful as a stability and protection or bunkers against the deliberate damage. Now, the safest mode of nuclear power plants in such conditions appears to be called shutdown. Now, I would put two if statements here. So there are at least 2 situations where perhaps the cold shutdown is not the best choice. One is if there is not enough redundancy in the outside power supplies, then operating the nuclear power plant in house mode could give an added defense in depth. And what will probably happen during the winter also in Zaporizhzhia, in freezing water conditions, the heat of the residual heat could be not sufficient actually to de-ice the water taking from the river. So that could be one of the situations where it would be wise to go back to the house load, or even more than house load, some load where the plant can easily catch the house load. Now, in a 6-unit power plant, catching the house load is in principle much easier than a single unit plant, as in Krško, so should not be so difficult. Then the next question, let me put it this way, as we were very much aware of what happened in Krško in 1991, nevertheless, no much research or thinking about the future events came out of that. So we were not much better prepared as the community for the Zaporizhzhia than we were for Krško. A little bit better, but we were actually not anticipating such development of things. Now, if we assume that it will happen again in the future, then perhaps one of the good ideas would be to kind of revise the perceptions of risks comparable to the more daily risks at hand. Now, the thresholds for let's say, starting evacuation around the nuclear power plant are there to prevent stochastic radiation events or damage to the people. So basically, if I'm very blunt here, to prevent cancers in 20 or 30 years from now, random cancers from in 20 or 30 years from now, which is really out of balance risk compared to the situation in the middle of the war, where there is no food, there is a lot of some people chasing you to kill you, no food, no medicine, no energy, or something like that. So perhaps we should rethink what is important risk and what is not important risk. And with this in mind, situations, the war conditions are probably mostly challenged to the nuclear security. And nuclear security in war conditions can never be managed by plant operators or regulators alone. It needs more than plant operators and regulators. Not like nuclear safety would be happy with only operators and regulators. So that's clearly beyond the scope of nuclear safety alone. And especially with Russia involved, the nuclear safeguards are probably not an issue here. Maybe there will nuclear safeguards could be an issue in the future wars, but in this one, I can safely say they are not there because of the plutonium in the plant. So forget about it. And the next important thing could be try to do something in the risk perceptions, comparative risk perceptions, try to somehow level out the possibilities for fear and fear-mongering in the future, because it will happen again. And if it will happen again, then do we need more resilient design for this, what will happen again in the future? Or perhaps the design of the plant is already sufficiently resilient. That's probably a good question where we could stop this and say thank you for your attention.
Leon, thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. Now, first, there are questions from the audience, from those who are here. I don't see. Okay, so.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I am Dr. Boris Sudovic. I have a question. I have observed that you have not mentioned antidotes. We can save life, we can save people if we use some anti-radicals. An example is dinatrium thiosulfate, non-toxic, very useful, but we can save life. How you think, how you organized to win against the war, atomic war? If a psychopathic, a lole, start a atomic war, but it is not so catastrophic, we can survive if you use anti-radicals. And my question is how you organize, how you think, and where is the Minister of Defense to present the how to organize the people in this bad situation. Also, Slovenia is in bad situation because have nothing organized in this in these events. The bunkers, anti-atomic, are transformed in dancing disco clubs and so on.
If you hear me, I'm not sure that this is within the scope of the lecture. The lecture was about nuclear power plants in work conditions.
Yes, but people are working and in these reactors and in these events, and we must protect them. It is possible, but I observed it is not organized.
It's very difficult to say what is and what is not organized in this respect in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant at the moment. So I would simply assume, because they know very well what they are doing, they will do whatever possible with the means they have. So at the same time, the probability that something serious will happen with radiation consequences there, especially because of the problems with the nuclear power plant, is not very large. So in general, I would say they have a very good chance of survival because of radiation. Their enemy at the moment is not radiation. Their enemy is the company policy of the old and new company, or more of the new company of the nuclear power plant than of the old company of the nuclear power plant. So this is the main enemy, and this one is difficult to survive. And maybe observation from the Twitter account, the Ukrainian staff is expected to sign the contract with the Russian company. They can resign immediately after they sign the contract with the Russian company and go away to Ukrainian territory after they have signed the contract and resigned. So, you know, that's a very personal choice. That's very, very, very tricky. So you can go away if you kind of acknowledge you are working for the enemy. In this sense, they are really in the great pressure. And this pressure is, in my view, much more serious than potential radiation consequences. And radiation consequences are actually, as you said, very easy or reasonably easy to manage, but the psychological pressures are not. Yes.
Okay, Johannes.
maybe question, is there any information regarding how many personnel is still at the nuclear power plant?
Not that I would be aware of, but it was in the order of 10,000 of staff in the plant before the war. So probably not very much less than 10,000.
I have also kind of political question. That is, this International Atomic Energy Agency is supposed to promote nuclear energy. But to me, thinking very simply, it seemed that by sending their inspectors, that they did the opposite. Because the message is, oh, this is something so important, we must go there. And so it seems that whenever something happens like that, you need this agency to come there, you know, and that's so you know what I mean.
Probably not an easy question. What would be better? I think that definitely for the international experts, independent of both sides in the war, it's good to have them around. It's kind of moral support, if you would like. It's kind of also technical support in a way, in limited ways, to the staff, so they have somebody to talk to who can understand them, at least in the technical manners. So it's probably better to have them than not. But yes, from the fear-mongering perspective, you might be correct. If you give such events too much visibility, this could add to the fear-mongering. Yes. Or perhaps also no, because at least in my view, the human psychology is pretty non-linear. So there is also a fatigue. If you talk a lot about the possible dangers and nothing happens, then people believe it's not dangerous. So it's tricky to answer. What's better?
Yes,
I think it's good they are there. At the moment, it's good they are there because there is at least the kind of independent source of information also coming out. Perhaps, again, not completely reliable, but...
Okay. Yeah. Any other question here? Any other question? I don't see any other question in the chat. And suppose it's... Sergei Pravosud. What will happen with spent nuclear fuel of Westinghouse Company? Is it related? I guess it is related to... Yeah, I suppose in a way, let's say, if in war conditions, I suppose it's related. What will happen if in war? That's what I would understand.
Well, let's make two groups of spent fuel. So spent fuel after 5 years of being spent, which is already in the passive cooling mode, that will not melt if you kill the cooling because it's already passive. The decay of the decaying chain is already in the phase that it's really difficult to get let's say serious contamination out of this. It's possible, but you need to bring in a lot of energy to destroy the integrity. And then, so I would forget about, I would kind of say, okay, whatever is in the dry storage, you can safely forget about any problems of this coming beyond the boundary of the campus of the plant. Then for the first 5 years, there are some chances it will melt. There are some chances if they melt, then of course the things like cesium and strontium will go around, and you will have some gaseous species, at least gaseous at the beginning, around. So it's the mechanisms to spread it up, not too difficult. Now, if this is Westinghouse or Russian fuel, doesn't really matter. It's simply the age of the fuel or the state of the spent fuel already in the passive mode or not.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any. Boshan?
What would you say about, let's say, it's probably premature, but what about lessons learned out of this situation? So you already mentioned some of the issues from the Slovenian experience, and now what can be new from this Ukrainian experience in this type of situation? What can be done better?
Well, at least I would hope that this situation and will have as a consequence a kind of a serious rethinking of certain things around the nuclear power. So we'll probably need to answer the question how resilient the design is. Is it resilient enough? Or is it not resilient enough? And the second one would be on the risk perceptions and risk management here. That's the first two I would put on the go, because the main question from the risk perspective is what is greater risk to the society, to be without electricity or to be with, because each source of electricity has some damage to the health and environment. Now, how can we rank this? What is important here? Is it more important to have electricity, or is it more important to avoid any consequences of any source of electricity? Because or which one we can avoid? I would tend to guess that nuclear power plant is pretty resilient, or it's much more actually resilient also in work conditions than any other source of electricity. It's very easy to destroy the dam of the hydropower plant or something like that, or destroy the shipping lines, or the amount of fuel you need to bring to the thermal power plant is usually huge. So it's really easy to interrupt the flow of this huge mass flow. And nuclear, they have resilience. They can operate on old fuel for a year or 2 years, or maybe new designs even more in the future. So the resilience which is given by such nuclear power plants is huge. Now, is it sufficient? That I cannot answer.
Any other question? Okay, and there are no questions in the chat, but I see they have, apparently it worked, they have all the discussion. So I propose that we thank the speaker again.